I want your younger sister, not you." He said it in front of everyone, in God's house, on a Sunday morning, with her whole world watching. Clara Whitmore did not scream, did not beg, did not give that room a single tear it was waiting for. She placed her necklace on the table. She walked out. They all thought that was the end of her story. They were wrong, because 12 years later, the man who destroyed her in that church would come crawling to the one woman who could save him, and she would walk back in as his rival's wife. Subscribe now. Drop your city in the comments. This story is going further than you think. The summer of 1812 came to Virginia with the kind of heat that settled into everything and stayed into the red clay roads, into the heavy green of the fields, into the walls of churches that had been standing since before the Republic had a name. Clara Whitmore had been awake since before dawn, not from nerves exactly. She would think about that later, about the specific quality of that morning, about whether some part of her had known in the way that the body sometimes knows things before the mind has caught up. She had risen in the dark and dressed by candlelight and sat at the small writing table in her room for a long time, not writing anything, just sitting. Her hands were folded in front of her. The candle burned down. She was 24 years old. She had brown hair and her mother's eyes, and the kind of face that people described as intelligent rather than beautiful, which she had long understood was the particular compliment offered to women whose value was considered to live somewhere other than their appearance. She did not mind this. She had always found more use for intelligence than for beauty, and she had spent her life behaving accordingly. She had known Edward Beaumont for 3 years. He had come to the Whitmore estate in the spring of 1809, introduced through a mutual family connection, and he had been from the first afternoon different from the men she had encountered in Virginia's social circuit. He asked questions, real ones, not the decorative inquiries that men made at dinner tables when they were performing interest in a woman's opinions. He asked, and then he listened, and then he asked the follow-up question that proved he had actually heard the answer. He had asked her that first afternoon what she thought about the practice of crop rotation on Virginia estates. She had told him, in detail, with the specific opinions she had formed from 3 years of reading agricultural correspondence from her father's library and observing the outcomes on the Whitmore land. He had listened to every word. Then he had said, "That's exactly what I've been thinking. No one else I've spoken to has put it that clearly." She had been careful after that conversation not to read too much into it. She was a woman who had been raised to be practical. And practical meant understanding that men who found a woman's mind interesting were not always men who intended to do anything about it. She had watched enough drawing room dramas to know that intelligence was something men admired in women and beauty was something they married. But Edward kept coming back, once a week, then twice. He wrote letters in between visits, long ones full of questions about the estate, about her reading, about what she thought about the political situation in Washington and the prices at the Fredericksburg markets. He came to her father's library and spent hours there. He sat across from her and talked about his plans for the Beaumont estate and asked for her opinion on every element of them. And then one evening in the garden of the Whitmore estate, he had taken her hand. He had said, "You are the only woman who understands me." She had believed him. She believed him for 3 years through every visit and every letter and every conversation that felt like the building of something real. She believed him through the seasons, through the tobacco harvests and the winter socials and the spring plantings and the summer heat. She believed him the way you believed in the ground under your feet, not because you tested it every morning, but because it had been there every morning for long enough that you stopped questioning whether it would hold. She should have tested it. She understood that afterward. But she had not. The Whitmore family had a younger daughter. Sophia was 20 years old that summer, 4 years Clara's junior, and she was everything that Virginia society had always rewarded, and Clara had never been. She was fair-haired and light-voiced, and she moved through social gatherings with the easy liquid grace of someone who had never been required to work for anyone's attention, because attention had always simply arrived. She was not unkind. Clara would not say Sophia was unkind, would resist that simplification even in the worst moments of what came after. But she was the kind of beautiful that made the world rearrange itself constantly and unconsciously to accommodate her. Clara had watched this happen her whole life. She had made her peace with it the way you made peace with the weather, not by approving of it, but by understanding it was not going to change and building your life accordingly. She had not apparently built it quite carefully enough. The morning of the church gathering was supposed to be an announcement. That was all Clara knew. Edward had written to her father, requesting the family's attendance at the Beaumont family church on the morning of June the 14th for an announcement of significance. Her father had read the letter at the breakfast table and smiled and looked at Clara with the expression of a man who believed he understood what was coming. Her mother had already begun discussing guest lists. Clara had said nothing. She had been careful for 3 years. She was not going to stop being careful now when it mattered most. She dressed in the blue dress her mother had suggested, not her best she had been told, save that for the formal occasion that would surely follow, and she had ridden with her family to the Beaumont church in the Whitmore family carriage, with her hands folded in her lap, and the summer heat pressing through the window, and something in her chest that she would not later be able to describe precisely. Not happiness exactly, something more careful than happiness. Something that understood on some level it had never quite managed to verbalize that the thing coming was either going to be everything she had believed or the end of that belief entirely. The church was full. Every family in the county, it seemed, had come. The Hargroves, the Pendletons, the Caldwells, the Morrisons. Women in their best summer dresses and men in coats, despite the heat, and children quieted by the solemnity of adult occasions they did not yet understand. The pews were filled. The candlelight was bright. Clara entered with her family and found their seats near the front, which was either an honor or something else she had not yet identified. She looked toward the front of the church. Edward was there. He was standing with his family, his father, his 2 brothers, his aunt, who had come down from Richmond. He was dressed formally, which meant the occasion was formal. He was looking toward the doors. He was not looking at her. That was the first thing she registered, and she registered it the way you registered a sound that wasn't quite right quickly in the back of her awareness filed under wait and see. Then she saw Sophia. Her younger sister was standing at the edge of the family group, not with the family in the pew. On her feet near the front, with a quality of stillness that Clara recognized because she had seen it before, the stillness of a person who was about to be the center of attention and was composing themselves for it. Around Sophia's neck was a necklace. Clara recognized it. It was the necklace Edward had given to Clara 2 years ago. The one she had at home in her jewelry box, which she had been saving for a significant occasion. The one she had worn exactly once to a small family dinner and had taken off carefully and put away to keep safe. Except it was not in her jewelry box. It was around her sister's neck. For exactly 3 seconds, Clara's mind tried to construct an alternative explanation. Her mind was very good at construction. It was what she had spent her life doing, building explanations and systems and plans out of the materials available. 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, she tried borrowed, perhaps, a misunderstanding. Sophia had found it and worn it without asking. Then Edward looked up and saw her, and in the half-second before he arranged his expression into something appropriate, she saw what was on his face. Not guilt, not apology. Relief. The relief of a man who had made a decision he had been carrying and was close enough now to the moment of its delivery that the carrying was almost over. She understood then, completely, everything. The room had not yet gone quiet. People were still settling, still greeting each other in the low voices of church gatherings. The Whitmore family was still filing into the pew beside Clara. Her mother was adjusting her gloves. Her father was nodding to someone across the aisle. No one else had seen what she had just seen. She sat with it alone for the 2 minutes it took for the gathering to settle, and for Edward Beaumont's father to rise and announce that his son had a happy declaration to make, and for Edward to step forward, and for Sophia to be guided to stand beside him. Sophia did not look at Clara. That was interesting. Clara noted it. Sophia was looking at Edward with the particular expression of someone performing appropriate emotion. Joy. Gratitude. The soft radiance of a woman being chosen, and she was doing it carefully in a way that required her eyes to stay directed away from her sister. Sophia knew. She had known. She had known when she borrowed the necklace, or accepted it, or however the transaction had occurred. She had known when she came to stand at the front of this church. She had known for however long this had been happening, weeks, months, long enough that she had made a decision and kept it, and been present in Clara's life during all the time that she was keeping it. Clara sat in the pew with this understanding and felt something happen in her chest that she would not name grief, because it was too large and too cold and too final for that word. Edward began to speak. His voice was warm and clear and carried the particular confidence of a man who was used to being listened to and believed that what he was about to say was good news for the room. He spoke about the Beaumont family's long connection to the Whitmore family. He spoke about the summer. He spoke about decisions made with a full heart. Then he looked at the pew where the Whitmore family sat. He looked at Clara. And he said it. Not loudly, not with cruelty. With the tone of a man stating something practical, something he had decided and was now communicating as a courtesy. I want your younger sister, not you. The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of a pause in conversation. The struck dumb quiet of 40 people absorbing something they had not expected and were trying to arrange into something that made sense. Clara heard it. She heard every word of it. She heard the specific quality of the silence that followed. She heard someone she didn't know who somewhere to her right make a soft sound of surprise. She heard her mother's breathing change beside her. She did not move. She sat in the pew with her hands folded in her lap, and she felt the full weight of what had been said land on her, the way things landed when they were true. Not with a crash, but with a settling, a terrible gravity, the kind of weight that did not crush, but simply became the new ground you were standing on. Then she stood up. She stood up the way she always did, straight without drama. Her back carrying itself the way it had always carried itself, because her mother had told her when she was 7 years old that the way a woman held her back told the room everything about what she thought of herself. She reached up. She removed the necklace she was wearing. Not Edward's necklace, her own, her grandmother's pearl on a thin gold chain, the one she had worn that morning, because it was the appropriate jewelry for a significant occasion, and she had been expecting a significant occasion. She walked to the table at the side of the church, the small offering table where the candles stood. She placed the pearl necklace on it, not dramatically, not performatively. Simply placed it down with both hands steady, the way you placed something down when you were done carrying it. Then she looked at Edward Beaumont. She looked at him for exactly long enough to make sure he understood that she was looking at him, that she was present, that she had heard every word and had not looked away from any of it. I understand, she said. 2 words. She did not say anything else. She turned, and she walked down the aisle of the Beaumont family church, through the doors, into the summer heat of June in Virginia. And she did not stop walking. Behind her, the room had still not found its voice. She heard the first murmurs, beginning the tentative, confused sounds of people restarting after a silence. And then the doors closed behind her, and she heard nothing more. She was 30 feet down the road before she allowed herself to stop walking. She stood on the road in the summer heat, and she pressed both hands against the front of her dress, and she breathed. Just breathed. In, out, in again. She was not going to cry on this road. She was not going to cry in this county. She was not, if she could manage it, going to cry anywhere that any of the 40 people in that church could see her. She breathed until she was certain of this. Then she straightened. Then she started walking again. She walked for 20 minutes before her father's carriage caught up to her. He had come alone. Her mother was still at the church, dealing with something that Clara did not want to think about, smoothing the social texture of a room that had just experienced something very public. Her father pulled the carriage alongside her and looked down at her from the driver's seat with an expression that she had never seen on his face before. Something that was not quite grief and not quite anger and was very close to the face a man made when he understood he had failed to protect something that deserved protecting. "Clara," he said. "I'd like to go home, Papa," she said. He said nothing for a moment. "Get in," he said. She got in. They rode home in silence. Not uncomfortable silence, the silence of two people who understood that no available words were adequate to what had just happened, and who trusted each other enough to be quiet together in it. When they arrived at the Whitmore estate, she went directly to her room. She sat at her writing table. She lit the candle, even though it was full morning, and she didn't need the light. She sat there for a long time. She thought about 3 years of letters and conversations and questions asked with apparent genuine interest. She thought about, "You are the only woman who understands me," said in a garden on an evening she had believed meant something. She thought about the necklace around Sophia's neck and the relief on Edward's face and the specific quality of the silence in that church. She thought about her own hands placing the pearl necklace on the offering table. She thought about the fact that she had not begged. She thought about the fact that she had not screamed or wept or done any of the things that the room had been waiting for her to do, because rooms that witnessed public humiliation always waited for the humiliated person to provide the dramatic response that made the watching worthwhile. She had not given them that, and sitting in her room at the writing table with the candle burning in the morning light, she found that this, the specific, quiet, unglamorous fact of not having given them what they were waiting for, was the first solid thing she had to stand on. Small, but solid. She picked up her pen. She began to write. Not a letter. Not anything for anyone else to read. A list. Her handwriting was always precise. Her governess had made sure of that, and it covered the page cleanly. At the top she wrote "What I know," and then she wrote down every true thing she could identify. She was 24 years old. She was educated. She had been managing portions of the Whitmore estate's operations for 2 years, because her father had asked her to, and she was good at it. She had read more agricultural and commercial correspondence than most men in this county. She had opinions that were worth having, and she knew this not because Edward Beaumont had told her, so she had known it before him, and she would know it after, but because she had tested them against reality, and they had held. She was 24 years old, and she had believed that being seen clearly by someone meant being chosen. She understood now that those were two different things. Being seen was not nothing. She would not pretend it was nothing. 3 years of genuine intellectual exchange she would not discard, that simply because it had not produced the outcome she expected. It had been real. It had simply not been sufficient. Not for Edward. Not for what he had finally decided he needed. She understood what he needed. She had always understood him. He had said so himself, which had turned out to be the truest and most painful thing he ever said to her. He needed something she could not give him. Not because she was not enough. Because what he needed was not her. She wrote this down carefully in the plain language she used for things she needed to see clearly. She did not dress it up or make it smaller than it was. She wrote it down and she looked at it, and she let it be exactly what it was. Then she wrote the next line. What comes next? She sat with that for a long time. The candle burned. Outside, Virginia went on being Virginia hot, certain of itself, entirely unconcerned with the interior life of a 24-year-old woman sitting at a writing table deciding what she was going to do with the rest of her life. She thought about Kentucky. Her Aunt Margaret lived in Kentucky. Aunt Margaret was her mother's older sister, a widow who had managed her late husband's farm alone for 15 years, with a particular combination of intelligence and stubbornness that the rest of the family found baffling, and that Clara had always privately admired. Aunt Margaret sent letters that smelled like the outdoors and said things like, "The eastern corn is coming in well this year, and I have thoughts about the winter wheat rotation that I'd like to discuss with someone who won't laugh." She had sent those letters to Clara specifically because Clara was the one who wrote back with actual thoughts about winter wheat rotation. Clara had visited once 5 years ago. She had spent 3 weeks on Aunt Margaret's farm and had come back with the specific restless energy of someone who had glimpsed a life that fit them and had then had to return to a life that didn't quite. She looked at the page. What comes next? She wrote one word under it. Kentucky. Then she put down her pen. She went to find her father. He was in the library. He was always in the library when something was wrong, because the library was the one room in the house where no one expected him to be managing anything, and managing things was what her father did with distress. He was holding a book he was not reading. She stood in the doorway. "Papa," she said. He looked up. "I want to go to Aunt Margaret's," she said. "In Kentucky." He looked at her for a long time. "For how long?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. "Long enough." He set the book down. "Your mother will want to discuss." "I know," Clara said. "I'll speak with her, but I need to know if you'll support it." Her father looked at his oldest daughter. At the face that had been for 24 years, the face of someone he could always count on to know what she was doing. At the face that had walked out of a church that morning with its back straight and its eyes clear, and had not given a room full of witnesses a single thing they were waiting for. "Yes," he said. "I'll support it." She nodded. "Thank you," she said. She went to pack. She did not speak to Sophia that evening. Sophia came to her room. She heard the knock soft and hesitant in the particular way of someone who wasn't sure they were welcome, and Clara sat at her writing table and looked at the door for a moment. Then she said, "Not tonight, Sophia." A pause. "Clara." "Not tonight." Clara said again. Same voice, steady, not cruel, just final. The footsteps moved away. Clara went back to her packing. She took the practical things, the work dresses, the boots, the agricultural correspondence she had been collecting, the 2 books on soil management that her father had ordered from a Philadelphia publisher, the writing supplies, the pearl necklace she had retrieved from the church's offering table because a servant had brought it back, and because it was her grandmother's and had nothing to do with Edward Beaumont. She left the blue dress. She was done with things chosen for the wrong occasion. She was 2 days outside Richmond when she finally let herself feel it. The carriage was moving through the western Virginia hills, and the summer heat was pressing through the windows, and she was alone because she had asked her father not to send anyone with her. And she sat with her hands folded in her lap, and she let the full weight of 3 years of belief arrive at once. It hurt. She did not pretend it didn't. She sat with it for exactly as long as she needed to. The grief of it, the specific sharp-edged grief of being seen and then not being chosen, of having offered her actual self and had it assessed and found acceptable in one category and insufficient in another. The grief of a sister's silence. The grief of a room full of witnesses. The grief of the necklace that had not been hers to put down because she had never actually been given it in the first place. She let it be what it was. Then she looked out the window at the Virginia hills moving past. Then she picked up the agricultural correspondence from the bag beside her and went back to reading. She had thinking to do. About Kentucky. About winter wheat rotation. About what a 24-year-old woman who had spent 3 years believing in the wrong thing could build when she stopped spending her intelligence on someone else's future and turned it toward her own. She had quite a lot of thinking to do. She was already started. Aunt Margaret was waiting at the door when the carriage arrived. She was 61 years old, lean and sun-weathered, with her gray hair pinned back in a style that suggested she had done it herself without a mirror and had not particularly cared about the result. She watched Clara climb down from the carriage with the 2 bags and the case of correspondence and the boots already dusty from the road, and she did not say anything about Edward Beaumont, or the church, or any of it. She had received 1 letter from Clara's father, brief, factual, the kind of letter her father wrote when emotion was present and words were insufficient, and she had written back in 4 sentences that said, "Send her. She can have the East Room. I have work that needs doing, and I reckon she's the one to do it. Don't worry about her." She looked at Clara now. "You look like you haven't slept properly in a week," she said. 5 days, Clara said. "Close enough." Margaret turned toward the house. "Come in. There's food. We'll talk about the East Field in the morning." Clara picked up her bags and followed her aunt inside. That was all. No ceremony, no drawn-out expressions of sympathy, no careful navigation of what had happened. Margaret was a woman who had buried a husband, managed a farm alone for 15 years, and survived 2 Kentucky winters bad enough to kill livestock, and she had long since lost patience for situations that required extended emotional processing when there was work to be done and food getting cold. It was, Clara thought, exactly what she needed. She ate, she slept, and in the morning she went to look at the East Field. The East Field was a problem. Margaret explained it over coffee before they walked out 60 acres of land that had been letting itself go for 3 seasons since the man who had been managing it retired, and his replacement had turned out to be neither as experienced nor as honest as advertised. The soil was depleted in the southeastern corner. The drainage was wrong in the middle section. 2 of the fences were in poor condition, and the cattle had been getting through into the winter wheat. "What have you tried?" Clara asked. Margaret looked at her. "You mean since I discovered the replacement was stealing from the supply budget, and I let him go in March?" "Yes," Clara said. "I have been trying to find someone competent," Margaret said dryly. "It has not been going well." Clara looked at the field notes Margaret had spread on the kitchen table, at the drainage maps, at the soil reports, which were basic, but gave her enough to work with. "Give me the week," Clara said. "Let me look at everything. Then I'll tell you what I think." Margaret looked at her niece, at the 24-year-old woman sitting at her kitchen table with agricultural drainage maps and a cup of coffee, and the specific, focused expression of someone who had arrived somewhere and was figuring out what to do with it. "All right," she said. Clara took the week. She walked every inch of the East Field. She talked to the 2 farmhands who had been there long enough to know the land's history. She dug soil samples from the depleted corner and compared them against the notes in the correspondence she had brought from Virginia. She reread 2 chapters of the Philadelphia Soil Management book, standing in the field itself, which the farmhands found unusual but did not comment on. On Friday, she came back to the kitchen table with a plan written out in 3 pages of her precise handwriting. Margaret read it. She read it twice. Then she looked up. "Where did you learn to do this?" "I've been reading your letters for 10 years, Clara said, "and my father's estate records, and everything I could find in his library on the subject." She paused. "I've never had land of my own to apply it to." Margaret set the pages down. "You do now," she said. "Tell me what you need." It was not simple. Clara had never been under the impression that it would be simple. The East Field recovery took the better part of that first autumn. The drainage correction required more labor than she had estimated, and the soil treatment for the depleted corner was a slower process than the book suggested. And one of the farmhands quit in September because he did not believe he said in taking direction from a woman who hadn't been farming for more than 3 months. Margaret had looked at Clara after he left and said, "I can find someone else." "I know," Clara said. "I'm not worried about him. I'm worried about the southeastern drainage before the first frost." Margaret had smiled then. It was a small smile, the smile of a woman who had been told she couldn't manage things alone for 15 years, and had managed them anyway, and had a specific appreciation for seeing that quality in someone else. "Then let's worry about the drainage," she said. By the end of November, the East Field was producing. Not spectacularly, Clara was realistic about timelines and had planned accordingly. But the drainage was corrected. The soil treatment was showing results in the western sections. The fences were repaired, and the winter wheat was in cleanly. The farmhand who had quit had been replaced by a man named Thomas, who was 63 and had been farming Kentucky land for 40 years, and who told Clara after the first 2 weeks that she was the most organized person he had ever worked for, man or woman, and that he intended to stay as long as she'd have him. She told him that was a considerable compliment. He said he had meant it to be. The first letter from Virginia arrived in December. It was from her mother, careful, full of social news that Clara understood were her mother's way of maintaining connection without directly addressing anything difficult. The last paragraph mentioned briefly that the Beaumont-Whitmore engagement had been formally announced, and that Sophia was very happy, and that her father sent his love, and hoped she was well. Clara read the letter at the kitchen table. She read it once. She folded it and put it in the correspondence cabinet she had set up in the east room under the letter M for Mother. Then she went back to the drainage report she had been reviewing. She was not without feeling. She would not pretend the letter did not cost her something. Not the news in it, not exactly, but the reality it confirmed. The thing in the church had not been a mistake, or a dream, or a misunderstanding that daylight would resolve. It was real, and it had been made permanent. She sat with that for the 10 minutes it deserved. Then she went back to the drainage report, because the east field was producing, and she had ideas about the north quarter, and spring was coming, and the work was there, and the work was hers. And that solidity, that concrete reality of a problem that could be addressed and solved and improved, that was the thing she could build on. She built on it. The north quarter was more ambitious. Clara had been thinking about it since October, when she had walked the property boundaries with Margaret, and seen the untouched land sitting fallow in the northern section. Good land well watered with none of the drainage issues of the east field. Land that had simply been overlooked because Margaret's late husband had focused his attention on the southern and eastern sections, and the north quarter had been left to sit. She brought the proposal to Margaret in January. "The north quarter," she said, spreading the maps on the kitchen table. "Corn primarily, with a rotation to wheat in the third year. The water access is better than the east field. We wouldn't have the drainage correction problem." Margaret looked at the maps. "That's 80 acres. "Yes." "That's a significant investment. Clearing fencing equipment." "Yes," Clara said. "I've costed it." She turned to the second page. "It's considerable for the first year. The second year begins to return. By the third year, the east field recovery plus the north quarter corn should put the farm ahead of where it's been in 10 years. Margaret looked at the numbers. She looked at them for a long time with the expression of a woman running her own calculations and checking them against the ones on the page. "Where did you learn to cost a project like this?" she said. "My father's estate accounts," Clara said, "and the Philadelphia correspondence. And—" She stopped. "Edward asked me to help him cost several projects for the Beaumont estate the second year I knew him. I learned from doing that." Margaret looked at her. "You built his plans," she said. "Yes," Clara said. "I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time. I thought I was helping someone. She stopped again, steadied. "I was building his plans." Margaret was quiet. "Now build your own," she said. She approved the North Quarter project. Spring came, and with it, the first real test of everything Clara had been planning. Clearing 80 acres required more coordination than the east field work, more labor, more equipment, more simultaneous moving parts. There were days in March when Clara was up before 4 and moving between 3 different work sites and making decisions about 6 different problems before noon and coming back to the farmhouse at dark, too tired to eat properly. Margaret watched this and said nothing. Then one evening she said, "You're running on Will." "Yes," Clara said. "Will runs out." "I know," Clara said. "I'll rest when the clearing is done." Margaret looked at her niece across the kitchen table. "Your father wrote me," she said. "He asked if I thought you were all right." Clara looked up. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you were the hardest working person on this property," Margaret said, "and that I was concerned you were using work the same way some people use whiskey." Clara sat with this. "Maybe," she said finally. "Not a judgment," Margaret said. "Just an observation. There's a difference between building something and running from something." "I know the difference," Clara said. "Do you?" She thought about it honestly. About the 4:30 mornings and the field plans spread across the kitchen table and the correspondence she was running now between 3 Kentucky merchants about corn prices and the way she had structured her days so that there was always something to do and always a reason to do it. "I'm doing both," she said, "at the same time." Margaret nodded. "That's honest." "The building is real," Clara said. "The running doesn't make the building less real." "No," Margaret agreed. "It doesn't." She picked up her coffee. Just make sure the building survives when the running stops. It was the most Margaret had said about the situation, and it was enough. Clara thought about it for several days afterward, turning it over, examining it the way she examined soil samples and field reports, looking for what was actually there rather than what she wanted to see. She was building something real, and she was also putting as much distance as possible in every waking hour between herself and the specific feeling of standing in a church and hearing those words and understanding, in the space of 3 seconds, that 3 years of belief had been precisely that belief, with nothing underneath it solid enough to hold. Both things were true. She let them both be true. The North Quarter clearing was finished in April. She was standing at the edge of the field, the newly cleared 80 acres, ready for the first planting with Thomas and 2 other farmhands nearby, and the morning coming in clear and sharp when Thomas said, "Miss Clara?" She turned. There was a man on horseback at the property edge. Not someone she recognized. He was perhaps 35, broad-shouldered, with the kind of practical clothing that suggested he worked rather than watched other people work. He had pulled up at the boundary and was looking at the cleared field with an expression that was not casual. "This your property?" he said. "My aunt's," Clara said. "I manage it." He looked at her, not with the dismissive recalibration she had learned to watch for the quick assessment and adjustment that men made when they found a woman in a position they expected a man to occupy. He looked at her the way he had looked at the field, with direct evaluating attention. "That clearing is well done," he said. "I've been watching the progress on this section since February. Didn't expect it to be finished this fast." "We had good weather in March," she said. "Weather helps," he said. "So does knowing what you're doing." She looked at him. "You're a farmer." "Among other things," he said. "William Carter. I have the property 2 miles north." He paused. "You're the Whitmore woman who came down from Virginia." "Clara Whitmore," she said. "Yes." He nodded. He looked at the field again. "What are you planting?" "Corn this year," she said. "Wheat rotation in year 3. Good plan for this soil," he said. "The water table in this section runs shallow. Corn does well." She looked at him. "You know this property?" "I know the county," he said. "I've been here 12 years. A pause. "Your drainage work on the east field, was that your plan?" She kept her expression level. "Yes." "I drove past it last fall," he said. "It was a mess in August. It isn't now." He looked at her directly. "Whatever you did, it worked." It was not effusive. It was not the exaggerated praise that people sometimes offered women as a form of condescension. How impressive for a woman underneath the surface of every compliment. It was a specific observation from a man who knew the land well enough to recognize competent work when he saw it. "Thank you," she said. "I'll let you get to it," he said. He started to turn his horse, then he stopped. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "if you're running into problems with the spring planting soil prep equipment, anything, I have resources I don't always need all at once. No obligation, just a neighbor offering." She looked at him for a moment. "I'll keep that in mind," she said. He nodded and rode on. Thomas appeared at her elbow. "That's Carter," he said. "Good man. Has the biggest operation in this part of the county. Doesn't waste words." "I noticed," Clara said. She went back to the planting schedule. But she thought about the conversation for the rest of the day in the specific way she thought about things that had a quality she couldn't immediately categorize. Not the content of it. The content was simple enough. What she turned over was the texture. The way he had looked at the field, and then at her, and had not performed the adjustment. The way, "What are you planting?" had been asked, the way you asked a colleague rather than an anomaly. She filed it and went back to work. The spring planting went in on schedule. And by June, 1 year after she had left Virginia on a carriage going west with 2 bags and a case of correspondence and a list of true things she was trying to stand on, the North Quarter corn was growing, the East Field was in its 2nd productive year, and Aunt Margaret's farm had turned a profit for the first quarter for the first time in 4 years. Margaret showed her the accounts on a Thursday morning with the expression she used for things that had turned out the way she had hoped, but hadn't said she hoped, because Margaret was not a woman who expressed hope directly. "Well," she said. "Yes," Clara said. "Your father is going to be pleased." "My father already suspects," Clara said. "He's been asking very detailed questions in his letters." Margaret smiled. "He taught you to read accounts. He knows what good ones look like." Clara looked at the numbers. At the columns her own work was reflected in. At the evidence plain and specific and unargued with of a year of decisions that had been correct. She felt something that was not the careful, managed satisfaction she had been allowing herself. Something warmer. Something that had been building so gradually she had not noticed it arriving. She was good at this. Not performing competence. Not seeking approval. Not building someone else's future with her intelligence while her own waited. She was simply good at this work, in the same way she had always been good at thinking, and the work was hers, and the results were hers, and nobody in Kentucky had told her it was impossible for long enough to make her believe it. A few people had tried, the merchant in town who had refused to discuss corn prices with her directly and had addressed all his remarks to Thomas standing beside her until she had quietly and precisely asked Thomas to wait outside and had continued the conversation herself. The neighboring farmer who had told Margaret, apparently with genuine concern, that it was a shame her niece was wasting her time on field management when she ought to be looking for a suitable husband. The woman at the county social who had said in the particular tone of someone offering a reasonable observation that Clara must be very brave to be managing property at her age and in her situation. Clara had smiled at all of them. Not the closed, composed smile she had worn in Virginia. A different one. The smile of a woman who had stopped needing people's understanding of her situation to match reality, because reality was going to demonstrate itself in its own time. It was demonstrating itself now. In July, William Carter came back, not to the field boundary this time. He came to the farm properly on a Saturday morning with his hat in his hands and the directness she had noticed in April. "Miss Whitmore," he said when Margaret's housekeeper showed him into the small sitting room, "I apologize for coming unannounced. I have a proposal I'd like to discuss if you're willing." Clara set down the correspondence she had been reviewing. A business proposal. "Yes," he said. He sat in the chair across from her, not waiting to be asked, not performing the social rituals of approach, simply sitting because sitting was the practical position for a conversation. She appreciated this. "I have a contract with a Lexington merchant for corn delivery in the autumn. More than my operation can supply this year. I overcommitted in the spring." He paused. "Your North Quarter corn. I've been watching it. It's going to come in well." "It is," she said. "I'd like to purchase a portion of your yield," he said. "At the Lexington price, not the local price. There's a difference of—" He named the figure. She knew the figure. She had been tracking Lexington prices for 4 months. "Why the Lexington price?" she said. "You could find local corn at local price." "Not this quality," he said. "And not from someone who plans ahead the way you've been planning ahead. I'd rather pay the right price and have reliability than save money and have problems." He paused. "That's how I do business." She looked at him. At the straightforwardness of this, the way he had arrived and stated a problem and proposed a solution and named a fair price without performing any of the maneuvering that business conversations in Virginia had always seemed to require. "I'd want to see the contract terms," she said. "Naturally," he said. He produced a folded paper from his coat. "I had Pritchard draw it up. He's the lawyer in town. You should have your own lawyer review it." She took the contract. She read it. All of it. He waited without filling the silence which she noted. The terms were exactly what he had said. No hidden provisions. No conditions that shifted the risk toward her. A fair contract clearly written. She looked up. "I don't have a lawyer yet," she said. "I'll review it myself and have my father's man in Virginia look at it by correspondence." "Take whatever time you need," he said. "One question," she said. "You said you overcommitted in the spring. How?" He looked at her. "I took on 2 new land sections in March," he said. "Pulled labor from the existing corn planting to prepare them. Misjudged the timeline." He paused. "It was my error," She absorbed this. He had told her his mistake directly, without softening it or attributing it to circumstance. "All right," she said. "I'll review the contract and send you a response by Thursday." "Thank you, Miss Whitmore," he said. He stood. He put his hat back on. At the door, he stopped and turned back. "I heard about your East Field work from Thomas," he said. "The drainage correction specifically. He said it was your plan entirely." "It was," she said. "Most people who come to a new property try to apply what they know from somewhere else," he said. "You looked at what the land needed and solved for that." He paused. "That's harder than it sounds." She looked at him. "What do you think?" he said. She blinked. "About," she said. "About the land," he said. "About farming it. About what you're building here." He held her gaze. "I'm asking because I'm interested in what you think, not because I need your answer to decide anything." She sat with this question. It was a question she had been asked before. Edward had asked it in those early conversations that had felt like being genuinely seen. But Edward's questions had been part of a process she understood now of assembling a picture of her usefulness, of what she could provide, of whether her intelligence could be applied to his purposes. This felt different. This felt like a man who was asking because he actually wanted to know. "I think land rewards consistency," she said. "People want quick results and they push for them, and the land tells them no, and they push harder, and the land tells them no again. If you work with what's there, instead of fighting for what you want to be there, that's where the results come from." He nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly right." He left. Clara sat in the chair for a long moment after the door closed. She was not going to read too much into a business conversation. She had learned the cost of reading too much into things, and she had no intention of repeating the tuition on a different man's account. But she sat there for a moment, and she thought about the specific quality of "I'm asking because I'm interested in what you think." And she thought about how different that was from "you're the only woman who understands me," which she now recognized for what it had always been. Not a statement about her, a statement about his need. A man reaching for a tool and describing the tool as exceptional. William Carter had not reached for a tool. He had asked a question. She filed it and went back to the contract. She sent him her response on Wednesday, a day early. She had 2 small revisions to the payment schedule, technical adjustments that made the timing more practical for her harvest calendar. She noted them clearly with the reasoning for each. He accepted both revisions by return letter without negotiation. He added one line at the bottom. "The revisions are better. Thank you for the attention to detail." She read that line twice. Then she filed the contract under C and went back to the harvest preparation. The corn came in September. It came in well. Better than her conservative estimate, which she had set conservatively on purpose because she had learned in a year of building that planning for what you knew and being surprised by better was preferable to planning for the best and being caught short. Thomas stood at the edge of the field the morning of the first harvest and looked at the yield coming in and said, "Miss Clara, I have been farming Kentucky land for 40 years. "I know," she said. "This is some of the finest corn I have seen come off this section," he said. She looked at the field. "It's the drainage on the east field," she said. "The correction improved the water table for this whole section. It wasn't just the east field we fixed." Thomas looked at her. "You planned for that?" "I hoped for it," she said. "I planned for the minimum." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're going to be all right, Miss Clara. I reckon you're going to be considerably more than all right." She looked at the field. She thought about a church in Virginia, about a necklace placed on an offering table, about 2 words spoken plainly in front of 40 witnesses. She thought about the list she had written by candlelight in the dark of the morning after. "What I know. What comes next?" "Yes," she said. She thought she was. The corn contract with William Carter was the first of 7. That was how Clara thought about it afterward. Not as a romantic beginning, not as the moment when something personal started, but as the first of 7 contracts, because that was what it had been, and because naming it accurately was how she kept herself honest about what was being built and what pace it was being built at. The second contract came in October of the same year, a different arrangement, a winter wheat forward sale to the same Lexington merchant negotiated by Clara directly with Carter's introduction and her own terms, which were better than what Carter himself had gotten the previous year, because she had done more research on the market, and he told her so plainly and without resentment. "You got a better price than I did," he said when she told him the terms. "I had more time to prepare," she said. "You had the same amount of time I did," he said. "You used it differently." She looked at him. "How do you know how I used my time?" she said. "Thomas talks," he said. "He mentions occasionally that you're up before 4 most mornings, and that you've been corresponding with every agricultural publication between here and Philadelphia." He paused. "I didn't say it as a criticism. I said it as an observation." She absorbed this. "Thomas talks too much," she said. "Thomas is proud of you," Carter said. "There's a difference." She filed that away and went back to the wheat delivery schedule. The third contract was in the spring of 1814, and by then they had developed a rhythm of meeting that was neither social nor purely transactional, but something in between that neither of them had named, and that Clara, for her own reasons, was not in a hurry to name. He came to the property once a week, usually on Thursdays, usually in the late morning. They discussed the market, the season problems that had come up, solutions she had found or was working toward. He asked her opinion, and listened to the answer, and offered his own, and deferred when hers was better, and said so when it was. She had been waiting from the beginning for the catch, for the moment when the asking would become using, for the point at which his interest in her thinking would reveal itself as interest in what her thinking could do for him. She had learned that lesson at considerable cost, and she had not forgotten it. She watched him carefully for 18 months. She found no catch. What she found was a man who ran his operation with the same consistency he had described to her in their first conversation. Steady, practical, honest about his mistakes in a way that most men she had known were not. He had told her about the overcommitment in the spring of their first year. He told her the following spring that he had made an error in the timing of a new section's preparation. He told her plainly and without drama that he had been wrong about the summer corn price prediction and that it had cost him. Each time he stated it and moved forward. No extended self-criticism. No performance of humility. Just the clear-eyed acknowledgement of someone who understood that mistakes were information and that the useful response to information was to use it. She recognized this quality because it was one she had been developing in herself, and she recognized the work it required. Aunt Margaret watched the Thursday visits with the expression of a woman who was observing something and choosing not to comment. She maintained this restraint for 14 months before she said one Thursday evening after Carter had gone, "He's a good man." "Yes," Clara said. "He's also not subtle." Clara looked up from the accounts she was reviewing. "About what?" she said. Margaret looked at her. "Clara." "He comes for business," Clara said. "He comes for business," Margaret agreed, "and he stays 2 hours longer than the business requires, and he asks your opinion on things that are entirely outside the scope of the contract." She paused. "I have been alive for 62 years. I know what that looks like." Clara was quiet. "I'm not ready," she said. "I know," Margaret said. "I'm not telling you to be ready. I'm telling you what I see." She went back to her accounts, but she thought about it in the careful way she thought about things she was not quite ready to examine directly, circling it, approaching from the side, checking from a distance. She thought about the difference between Edward and William Carter. Not in the obvious ways were easy, almost too easy, the kind of comparison that would make her look like she was simply selecting the opposite of what had hurt her. She was not going to make decisions by opposition. She was going to make them by understanding. Edward had found her useful. That was the clearest way she could put it, and she had arrived at that clarity slowly over 2 years of distance and work, and the particular honesty that came from having nothing to protect anymore. He had found her useful, and her usefulness had felt like connection, because she had needed it to feel like connection, because connection was what she had been hoping for. She had filled in what wasn't there with what she wanted to be there, and she had been so good at filling things in. It was the same skill that made her good at land management, the ability to see potential and build toward it, that she had not noticed the difference between a thing and the shape she was making where a thing wasn't. William Carter asked her what she thought, not what she could do for him, not for information he would use, what she actually genuinely thought. And he listened to the answer. And then he said what he thought. And they were sometimes different, and when they were different, they examined both and found which was better. And it was not always hers, and it was not always his, and neither outcome was treated as a victory or a defeat. This was, she had come to understand what actual conversation felt like. She had not experienced it at 21. She was experiencing it now. In the spring of 1815, 3 years after she had arrived in Kentucky with 2 bags and a case of correspondence, Clara Whitmore bought land. Not Margaret's land, her own. 40 acres adjacent to the North Quarter, purchased from a farmer who was moving his family west and wanted a quick sale. She had been watching the property for a year, had been saving systematically, had had Pritchard review the deed. She paid for it herself in full, with money the farm had earned. She told her father in a letter. He wrote back in 2 days, which was faster than he had ever responded to any communication. And the letter said, "Clara, your mother and I are very proud. The price you paid was fair, and the location is excellent. Tell me about your planting plans." She wrote back 8 pages about the planting plans. She told Carter on a Thursday. He looked at the deed she showed him. 40 acres, he said. 40 acres, she said. He looked at her. You've been planning this for a year. Yes. You didn't mention it. It wasn't finalized, she said. I don't discuss plans until they're finalized. He was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do with it? She told him. The crop rotation she had designed. The connection to the North Quarter's water access. The 3-year plan that would, by her conservative estimate, make the combined North Quarter and new section the most productive portion of the county's corn supply. He listened, the way he always listened, with the full, unperforming attention she had learned to rely on. When she finished, he said, "That's the most ambitious agricultural plan I've heard in 12 years in this county." Is that a compliment or a concern? She said. Both, he said. The ambition is right. The execution will require more labor than you currently have access to. I know, she said. I've been working on that. He looked at her. Clara, he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. He had been calling her Miss Whitmore for 3 years, which she had understood as deliberate, the respect of a man who was not going to presume. She looked at him. I would like to propose something, he said. And I want you to understand before I say it, that if the answer is no, nothing between us changes. The business arrangements stand. The Thursday meetings stand. Nothing changes. She waited. I would like to propose a partnership, he said, not just in the corn contracts, a formal partnership between your operation and mine. Combined purchasing power, shared labor access in peak seasons, coordinated market timing. He held her gaze. Your land management combined with my distribution network. It would be significant. She looked at him. And personally, she said. He did not look away. Personally, he said, I have been hoping for some time that the business partnership might become something more. When you are ready, if you ever are. He paused. I am not proposing anything today that requires a personal answer, only a business one. The rest, he stopped. The rest is yours to decide, at whatever pace you decide it. Clara sat with this for a long moment. She thought about the catch she had been watching for. She thought about 18 months of Thursday meetings and 7 contracts, and not one moment in which his attention to her thinking had served his purposes at her expense. She thought about what do you think, and you got a better price than I did, and both said plainly, when she had asked if his concern was a compliment. She thought about what it meant to make a decision with both eyes open, rather than with hope filling in the spaces where certainty wasn't. "The business proposal," she said. "I'll review the terms." "Of course," he said. "Bring me the structure Thursday." "I will." A pause. "Carter," she said. He looked at her. "The personal question," she said. "I'm not saying no. I'm saying I need time to know what I'm saying." He nodded once. "That's all I'm asking for." He left. Margaret, who had been audibly present in the kitchen during the conversation, and had clearly heard everything through the door. She had not entirely closed, appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee and an expression of profound satisfaction. "Not subtle," Clara said. "No?" Margaret agreed, handing her a cup. "Neither was you saying you're not saying no." Clara drank her coffee. She was smiling. It arrived quietly, without announcement. The way real things arrived. She simply noticed one Thursday morning in the autumn of 1815 that she was looking forward to the meeting. Not to the business of the meeting, to the meeting, to his arrival, to the specific quality of the 2 hours that followed it. She noticed it, and she examined it honestly, and she found it was not the filling in she had done before. There was no shape she was making where something wasn't. There was something there, solid and specific and built over 3 years of evidence, and she was choosing to acknowledge it. She told him on the following Thursday. Not dramatically. She was not a woman for drama. She simply said when the business portion of the meeting was concluded and he was gathering his papers to leave Carter. He stopped. "The personal question," she said. "I've thought about it." He set the papers back down. "And," he said, "I am not going to be rushed into anything," she said. "I am not going to be anyone's idea of a rescued woman who is grateful for the opportunity. I have built something here that is mine, and I intend to keep it mine." She held his gaze. "If you are asking to build something with me beside me, not above me or in front of me, then I am interested in what that looks like." He looked at her for a long moment. "That is exactly what I'm asking," he said. "Then we can discuss what that looks like," she said. He sat back down. They were married in the spring of 1816. The ceremony was small. Margaret Thomas Pritchard, Clara's father, who had ridden from Virginia for the occasion, and who shook William Carter's hand and then said to Clara privately, "He's a good man, Eliza." He hadn't called her Eliza since she was 12. She understood that it was the highest form of his approval. She wore a dress the color of the Kentucky spring. Not white, not the elaborate gown of a woman performing her own wedding. Something practical and hers. Her mother wrote a letter that arrived 2 days before the ceremony. It was warm and genuine, and the last paragraph said that Sophia sent her love, and was very happy, and hoped Clara was happy too. Clara read the letter. She put it in the cabinet under M. She was happy, not despite Virginia, not in spite of the church and the necklace and the 2 words that had followed her west, not as revenge or proof, or any of the things that happiness after humiliation was sometimes used for. Just happy, on its own terms, because she had built something real and chosen someone real, and the foundation under her feet was one she had laid herself. The letter from Virginia came in the autumn of 1820, not from her mother, not from her father, from a man she had not had direct correspondence with in 8 years. She recognized the handwriting immediately. She had seen it on enough letters in the early years, long inquiring letters that she had read carefully and answered thoughtfully, and that she now understood had been the requests of a man mining her intelligence rather than the correspondence of someone who genuinely valued it. She set it on the desk. She did not open it that morning. She went to the field with Thomas and checked the winter wheat progress and reviewed the labor schedule for the harvest and came back at noon and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and opened the letter. Edward Beaumont's handwriting had changed. Tighter. The letters pressed harder against the page, the way handwriting changed when the person holding the pen was under pressure. The letter was not long. He explained in the careful language of a man who needed something that the Beaumont estate had encountered significant financial difficulties over the past 2 years. A series of poor harvests. Some trading arrangements that had not produced the expected returns. A loan situation that had become complicated. He was writing, he said, to several old connections in the hope of identifying possible avenues of support or partnership. He had heard, he said, that she was doing well in Kentucky. He hoped she was well. He wondered if there might be any arrangement that could be of mutual benefit. Clara read the letter twice. She set it on the table. She sat with it for exactly as long as she needed to. Then she called for Carter. He came from the north section, where he had been reviewing the drainage work on the newest acquisition. They had bought 2 more parcels in the past 3 years, each one chosen by Clara and assessed by both of them together, each one now productive. He came in and looked at her face, and then at the letter on the table. "Read it," she said. He read it. He set it down. "Edward Beaumont," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" She had been thinking about this since she opened it. "He needs help," she said. "The kind of help that requires a significant operation and established trading relationships." She paused. "The kind of help that you have." Carter looked at her steadily. And he's coming to us," she said. "Not to me. Specifically, he doesn't know about us. He wrote to Clara Whitmore of Virginia. He doesn't know that Clara Whitmore is now Clara Carter, and that the operation he's reaching out to is run by both of us." She paused. "But he's coming to us." Carter was quiet. "The county gathers every autumn," she said. "The Morrison gathering. The Virginia families send representatives. Edward will be there. If he is as desperate as this letter suggests, he will come himself." She looked at her husband. "I want to go." "To Virginia," he said. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment, reading her not the way Edward had read her, not for what she could provide, but the way William Carter had always read her, for what was actually there. "Not for him," she said. "Not revenge, not proof." She held his gaze. "I want to stand in a room with the people who were at that church, and I want them to see what 8 years look like. I want them to see what I built." She paused. "And I want to be there when he realizes who he wrote to." Carter looked at the letter, then at his wife. "When do we leave?" he said. They arrived in Virginia in October. The Morrison gathering was the social event of the autumn season, a tradition that had been running for 20 years, attended by every significant family in the county, and representing, as far as Richmond society was concerned, the official opening of the social season. Clara had been away for 8 years. She had changed in ways that were visible and ways that were not. The visible, she had the particular quality of a woman who had spent years working rather than being decorative, a physicality that was different from the careful presentation of Virginia drawing rooms. The invisible, she walked into a room now with the internal certainty of someone who had built her own floor and was standing on it. Carter walked beside her. They had discussed how to arrive. Not dramatically, Clara was not interested in performance. They arrived at the correct time, greeted the Morrisons with appropriate warmth, accepted wine, moved into the room the way people moved when they were not trying to be noticed, and were going to be noticed anyway, because something about them was different from the room they were entering. Mrs. Morrison had known Clara's mother for 30 years. She saw them come in and crossed the room immediately and took Clara's hands and said, "My dear, 8 years." She looked at Carter. "And this must be your husband. I have heard very good things about the Carter operation." "We've been fortunate," Carter said. "You've been capable," Mrs. Morrison said. "Fortunate and capable are different. You both seem to have the second." She squeezed Clara's hands. "Your father told me what you've built." He could not stop talking about the North Quarter. "He visited in the spring," Clara said. "He walked every inch of it." "He was proud," Mrs. Morrison said. "He glowed." Clara felt something warm settle in her chest. Then Mrs. Morrison's expression shifted, slightly. The adjustment of a woman who had just seen something across the room and was deciding how to manage the information. "Edward is here," she said quietly. To Clara specifically. Clara looked at her. "I thought you should know," Mrs. Morrison said. "Before rather than during." "Thank you," Clara said. Mrs. Morrison moved away. Carter said beside her low, "Ready?" "Yes," Clara said. She was. She found Edward 20 minutes later, which was neither accident nor arrangement. The room was not large enough for two people to avoid each other for an entire evening, and Clara had not planned to avoid him. She had come to be present. She was present. He saw her before she saw him. She knew this because when she turned from the conversation she had been having with James Hargrove, a man who had been at the church 8 years ago, and who was now shaking her husband's hand and saying that he had been following the Carter operation's growth with considerable interest, she found Edward Beaumont already looking at her from across the room. He looked different, not aged exactly, but changed in the way that people changed when years had not been easy. Something drawn tighter, something behind his eyes that had not been there when he was the most comfortable man in every room he entered. He was still handsome. Virginia had always rewarded his face and had not stopped. But the ease was gone, the uncomplicated confidence of a man who had never had to question the ground under his feet. She understood what that ground had felt like. She also understood now what it felt like to have built your own. He crossed the room toward her. Carter was beside her. Not in front of her, beside her. She felt him make the choice deliberately, the same way he had made every choice in the past 4 years. Present, not protective. There. Edward stopped in front of her. He looked at her for a moment. He looked at Carter. Something happened in his face. The specific reconstruction that occurred when a person was assembling information they had not expected into a coherent picture. Clara Whitmore, Kentucky. The operation he had written to. Clara Whitmore, who had left Virginia 8 years ago with nothing, who was standing in front of him now beside a man whose name Edward knew, whose trading operation Edward's father had attempted to court and failed to interest, whose reputation in the regional market was the exact kind of established, respected, significant presence that the Beaumont estate desperately needed. She watched him understand it. "Clara," he said. "Edward," she said. A pause. "I didn't know," he started. "That I was the one you wrote to," she said, evenly, without heat. He looked at Carter. "William Carter," Carter said, and extended his hand. He did it the way he did everything, directly, without performance. "My wife has told me about you." Edward shook his hand. He looked back at Clara. "Your wife," he said. "Yes," she said. The room continued around them. Conversations and wine glasses and the warm noise of a social gathering, entirely unconcerned with the specific weight of what was happening in this particular corner of it. Edward said, "You built the Carter operation." "We built it," she said. "The corn arrangement, the North Quarter, the Lexington contracts." He had done his research, she realized, had looked into the operation before writing to it, or had been looking into it since learning who was behind it. Either way, he knew what she had done. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need to speak with you about the letter." "I know," she said. "We'll arrange a meeting tomorrow, with Pritchard." He blinked. "Pritchard, our lawyer," Carter said. "If we're discussing the estate situation, we'll want proper representation on both sides." Edward looked between them, and Clara watched something happen in him that she had not expected to see, not shame exactly, which she would have understood and could have categorized. Something more complicated. The specific expression of a man encountering the full reality of a decision he had made 8 years ago, standing in front of the consequence of that decision, and understanding for the first time that the consequence was not diminished or broken or gone. It had simply become someone else's success. She held his gaze, not with triumph, not with anger, with the steadiness of a woman who had nothing to prove and knew it. "Tomorrow," she said. 10 o'clock. At Pritchard's office. "Yes," Edward said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he said quietly, so that only she could hear it, "You look well, Clara." "I am well," she said. He nodded. He moved away into the room. Carter said beside her, "That was different from what I expected." "What did you expect?" she said. "I'm not sure," he said. Something more dramatic. Drama requires someone who needs the audience, she said. I don't need this room. He looked at her. No, he said. You don't. He took her hand. Not a gesture for the room to see. A gesture for her, the simple, solid fact of his hand closing over hers, in the way it had been closing over hers for 4 years, the way that meant, I'm here and you're here, and that's the whole story. She held it. And in the Morrison family gathering in the autumn of 1820, the room that had watched Clara Whitmore walk out of a church 8 years ago, with nothing, that room looked at what she had walked back into it with. And the looking was a different kind than the one that had followed her out the door. This time, the room was not waiting for her to break. This time, the room understood it had been wrong about what she was. And Charlotte Pembroke, standing near the window with her wine glass, she who had attended the church that summer morning in 1812, and had whispered to the woman beside her that it was inevitable that Clara had always been too much of one thing and not enough of another, looked at Clara Carter standing beside her husband in the center of the room and said nothing. There was finally nothing left to say. Pritchard's office in Richmond was exactly what a lawyer's office in 1820 was supposed to be. Walls of documents. A desk that communicated seriousness. The smell of paper and ink, and 30 years of other people's problems being systematically resolved. Clara had been in offices like this before. In Kentucky, Pritchard, their Pritchard, a different man with the same professional gravity, had become as familiar as the farmhouse kitchen. She sat across from a desk, without discomfort. Edward Beaumont had not yet arrived when she and Carter came in at 5 minutes to 10. He arrived at 10 exactly, which told Clara something. Not late, he had too much at stake to be late. Not early, arriving early would have been a concession of anxiety he was not yet prepared to make. 10 o'clock on the mark, the choice of a man trying to maintain the appearance of control in a situation that had been out of his control since he walked into the Morrison gathering the night before and found Clara Carter standing in the center of the room. He sat across from them. He looked at Pritchard, at Carter, at Clara. Thank you for agreeing to meet, he said. You wrote us a letter, Clara said. It seemed appropriate to respond in person. He looked at her directly. I didn't know it was you. I know, she said. You wrote to the Carter operation. You didn't know who ran it. Who built it, Carter said. The correction was quiet and entirely deliberate. Edward looked at him. She built it, Carter said. I had an existing operation. Clara expanded it into something neither of us could have built alone. But the agricultural foundation, the land management, the crop systems, the trading relationships, that's hers. Edward absorbed this. That's why you're here, Clara said. The letter. Tell me what the actual situation is. He looked at her for a moment, the look of a man deciding whether to maintain the managed version of his situation or to say what was true. She recognized it. She had watched him look that way before in conversations across the Whitmore family parlor. When she had asked him a direct question, he had to decide whether to answer directly. He had not always answered directly. She waited to see what he would do now. He said, The estate is in serious difficulty. Not failing, not yet, but close enough that the difference matters less than the timeline. What happened? She said. Several things, he said. Sequentially, a bad harvest year in 1818. A trading arrangement that I had structured around forward prices that did not hold. A loan that I extended against the expectation of income that didn't materialize. He paused. And a man of business who I discovered last spring had been managing his own interests alongside mine for approximately 4 years. Clara went still. A man of business, she said. A fraud, Edward said flatly. Smaller in scale than what I understand happened to your friend Alexander Whitmore some years ago, but the same principle. I trusted someone I should have verified. Clara looked at Carter. Carter said to Edward, You've been managing this alone. Yes, Edward said. My father, he is not well. He does not need this. He looked at the desk. I have been attempting to hold the situation without it becoming known. It is known, Clara said. He looked up. Edward, she said. People talk. You know that better than anyone. The same network that told me what happened in Virginia for 8 years told me about the Beaumont estate difficulties before your letter arrived. She paused. The letter was not a surprise. The name on it was. He was quiet. Who else knows? Carter asked. The creditor, Edward said. The bank. My own lawyer who advised me to consolidate before it became a legal matter. He paused. And now you. Pritchard, who had been silent throughout, said, May I see the debt structure? Edward placed a folded document on the desk. Pritchard opened it. Clara watched Pritchard's face as he read. Pritchard was not a man whose face moved easily. He had spent 30 years training it. Not to. But she had been watching his expressions for long enough to read the small signals. What she saw was not alarm. It was the assessment of something manageable that had been allowed to become serious by not being addressed earlier. It can be worked with, Pritchard said. Edward looked at him. The core assets are intact, Pritchard said. The land value alone covers the primary debt. The issue is liquidity and the trading relationships you've lost. He looked at Clara, then at Carter. Which is why he wrote to you. Yes, Edward said. Carter said, What are you asking for specifically? Edward looked at his hands for a moment. Clara recognized this too, the specific posture of a proud man preparing to ask for something he had never expected to need to ask for. A trading partnership, he said. Access to the Carter operations' Lexington relationships and distribution network, in exchange for an agreed revenue share over 5 years. He paused. And if there is any possibility, a recommendation to your bank. A character vouching for the estate's recovery potential. The office was quiet. Clara looked at her husband. Carter looked at her. This was how they made decisions, not with deference, not with one of them waiting for the other to declare a position. They looked at each other, and they both said what they actually thought. It's a viable arrangement on paper, Carter said to her. The Beaumont land is good land. If it's managed correctly going forward, the revenue potential is there. The management is the question, Clara said. Yes, Carter agreed. She turned back to Edward. The man of business who defrauded you, she said. How did you discover it? I finally looked at the accounts myself, Edward said. In detail, for the first time. He said this without flinching, which surprised her. It was an admission that cost him something, and he made it plainly. Why then, she said. After 4 years. He looked at her. Because my wife asked me to, he said. Clara went very still. She had not expected that. In everything she had thought about this meeting, in all the years she had not thought about Edward Beaumont, and the years she had thought about him only from a distance, and with the careful clarity of someone who had processed something fully, she had not thought about Sophia. About what 8 years of marriage to Edward Beaumont had looked like from the inside of it. Sophia asked you to look at the accounts, Clara said. Yes. He held her gaze. She has been asking me to look at many things for the past 2 years. He stopped. She is not the woman I thought she was when I married her. She is considerably more than I understood. He paused again. Though I will admit I have a history of failing to understand women who are considerably more than I give them credit for. He said it plainly. Not with drama, not performing regret, simply stating it as the accurate description of a pattern he had finally identified. Clara held very still inside. Not because the words hurt, because they didn't, and the absence of pain was its own kind of information about how far she had actually traveled. Is she well? Clara asked. Sophia. Yes, he said. She is. She handles the household with more competence than I recognized for years. She has opinions about the estate that I spent a long time dismissing. He looked at the desk. She is the one who told me to write to the Carter operation. She had been following your work. Sophia has been following my work, Clara said. For years, Edward said. She reads everything about the Kentucky agricultural developments. She knew about the Lexington contracts before I did. He paused. She told me that if anyone could help us, it was you. That you would, she said, you would be fair. Even to us. The office was entirely quiet. Carter said very gently, Clara. She looked at him. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. 4 years of Thursday meetings and 7 contracts and a decade of knowing her own mind, he simply looked at her with the expression that said, "This is your decision and I am here." She looked back at Edward. "I want to ask you something," she said. "All right," he said. "The church," she said. 8 years ago, the way you said it in front of everyone, not privately, not before, in front of all of them." She paused. "Was that a decision you made, or did it simply happen the way things happen when a man does not plan carefully enough?" The question landed in the room with the weight of something that had been waiting 8 years to be asked. Edward looked at her for a long moment. "It simply happened," he said. "And I told myself after that this meant it wasn't cruelty. That cruelty required intention." He held her gaze. "It took me several years to understand that the absence of intention doesn't change the outcome. That carelessness causes the same damage as deliberateness. It just allows the person who caused it to feel better about themselves." He paused. "I have not felt particularly good about it for some time." She nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said, "for saying that." "It's the least I could say," he said. "It is, in fact, considerably less than is owed." "I know," she said. "But it's what was asked." She looked at Carter. "We'll review the debt structure," she said. "Give us until this afternoon. We'll have a response by 4 o'clock. Edward stood. He understood that this was the conclusion of the morning's meeting Clara had given him, the only thing he was going to get right now, which was that a response was coming. Whether it was yes or no would be determined by her on her timeline in consultation with her husband. "Thank you," he said. He extended his hand to Carter. Carter shook it. He extended his hand to Clara. She looked at it for a moment. Then she shook it. He left. The office was quiet for a moment. Pritchard closed the document and looked at them both. "Well," he said. "Well," Carter agreed. Clara stood up. She walked to the window and stood there with her back to both of them, looking at whatever was outside the glass, and she breathed. Just breathed. The same way she had breathed on the road outside the church, standing still in the summer heat, deciding what she was going to do with the next moment and the moment after that. "I am not doing this for him," she said. "I know," Carter said. "Or for any reason connected to what happened." "I know that too," he said. "The land is good land," she said. "Mismanaged land that can be restored is exactly the kind of opportunity we have been looking for to expand the distribution network." "Yes," Carter said. "And Sophia." She stopped. Carter waited. "If Sophia has been asking him to look at his own accounts for 2 years," Clara said, "then she understands more than he does what the situation requires. And if the arrangement moves forward, she is going to be involved whether Edward thinks to involve her or not." She turned from the window. "I want to speak with her." Carter looked at her. Before we decide," Clara said. Pritchard said carefully, "Is that?" "It's necessary," Clara said. "If we're going to do this, I need to understand who we're actually doing business with. And Sophia is the one running the household. She always was. She just did it decoratively instead of practically, which is what the world asked of her." She paused. "I want to know if she's willing to do it differently." Carter looked at Pritchard. Pritchard looked at Carter. "Send a note to the Beaumont house," Carter said to Pritchard. "Ask if Mrs. Beaumont can receive a call this afternoon." Clara had not seen Sophia in 8 years. She had received the letter about the engagement. She had received a letter the following year, announcing the birth of a son, Edward III, which her mother had forwarded with a note that said simply, "I thought you should know." She had received 3 letters from Sophia herself over the years. Hesitant, careful letters that stopped just short of apologizing and did not quite reach the asking of forgiveness. Clara had read each of them. She had not responded. Not from cruelty. From the understanding that some gaps could not be bridged by correspondence, and that whatever needed to be said between them would require a conversation that letters were not adequate for. The conversation arrived 8 years later than Clara had expected it, and in circumstances neither of them had planned. Sophia received them in the front parlor of the Beaumont house. She was 32 now, 4 years younger than Clara, which meant Clara was 36, and found she had stopped being aware of the number in the way she had once been aware of it, measuring herself against a society that counted years differently for women than for men. Sophia was still fair and still light-voiced, but she had a quality Clara had not seen before. A quality she recognized because she had seen it develop in herself, in a mirror over 8 years. The quality of a woman who had been required to understand things she had not originally been prepared for. She stood when Clara came in. She looked at Clara for a moment. Then she said, "I have been trying to write you a letter for 8 years." "I know," Clara said. "I received 3 attempts. Sophia's face moved with something that was not quite shame and was not quite grief, and was the particular expression of someone who has been living with a thing long enough to have exhausted simpler emotions about it. "I don't know where to start," Sophia said. "Start with what you need," Clara said. "We can work backward from there." Carter excused himself. He had understood without being asked that this was a conversation that did not require him. He said he would speak with the estate manager about the land records and meet Clara back at Pritchard's office. He left. The 2 women sat. Sophia said, "He didn't love me." Clara looked at her. "Edward," Sophia said. "He chose me because I was the kind of woman the world told him he should want, and I let him because I wanted to be chosen." She looked at her hands. "I was 20 years old. I thought being chosen was the same thing as being loved." She paused. "It took me several years to understand the difference." "When did you understand it?" Clara said. "When I started asking him to look at the accounts," Sophia said, "and he couldn't." She looked up. Not because he was incapable, because he had never had to. He had always had someone to manage it for him. She paused. "First you, then me, then Henley." She stopped on that name. "I found what Henley had been doing 6 months before Edward did. I tried to show him, and he didn't want to look." "What did you do?" Clara said. "I kept looking myself," Sophia said. "I built a record. The way you apparently did in Kentucky. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew it was what needed doing." She held Clara's gaze. "I am not you. I know that. I was not prepared the way you were prepared. But I have been learning." Clara sat with this. She thought about a 20-year-old girl who had wanted to be chosen and had not understood what she was taking. She thought about Aunt Margaret saying, "Just make sure the building survives," when the running stops. She thought about what it meant to learn things you should have known earlier, and the specific cost of that education, and whether the cost changed the value of what was learned. "The estate," Clara said. "If we arrange a partnership, what role do you want?" Sophia stared at her. "You're asking me?" "You said you've been learning," Clara said. "What have you learned?" Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've learned that the corn rotation on the eastern section is wrong for the soil. I've learned that the trading arrangement that failed did so because Edward accepted a verbal commitment instead of a written contract. I've learned that the household budget has been inflated in 3 categories for 2 years, and I know which ones, and I know why." She paused. "I've learned that the estate's best asset is the river access on the southern quarter, and that it's been completely underutilized." Clara looked at her younger sister, at the woman who had been decorative by design and had been learning to be useful by necessity, and had arrived at 32 at something that looked like the beginning of what Clara herself had built. Not the same, not as far along, but real and earnest, and built on the same principle that understanding your situation clearly was the only starting point that mattered. "The river access," Clara said. "Tell me more." Sophia told her. It took 20 minutes, and Clara asked 6 questions, and Sophia answered all of them with the specific detail of someone who had been thinking about this for a long time and had never had anyone ask her about it before. When she finished, Clara was quiet. Then she said, "You should be in the meeting this afternoon." Sophia blinked. The meeting with Pritchard. Yes, Clara said. If we're arranging a partnership with the Beaumont estate, I want the person who understands the river access and the soil rotation and the budget categories in the room. She paused. That's you, not Edward. Sophia looked at her for a long moment. Clara, she said. Why would you? Because it's the practical decision, Clara said. And because she stopped, steadied. Because what happened in that church was between you and me and Edward, and I am not going to make business decisions based on it. That is not the woman I built myself into. Sophia's eyes filled. She did not let it become crying. She held it the way a woman held things when she had learned that holding them was necessary. But her eyes were full, and Clara saw it, and neither of them looked away. I'm sorry, Sophia said. I know you are, Clara said. I know that too. A pause. Is it enough? Sophia said. Clara thought about it honestly. The real answer, not the comfortable one. It's what's true, she said. And I have learned to work with what's true. Sophia nodded. She stood. She smoothed the front of her dress. She squared her shoulders in the way that women squared their shoulders when they were deciding what kind of person they were going to be in the next hour. I'll need to review the river access maps before the meeting, she said. Bring them, Clara said. They arrived at Pritchard's office together. Edward was already there when they walked in. He looked at them, at his wife, beside his former love together, both of them carrying papers, both of them with the expression of women who had had a conversation that had moved something significant and were now ready to work, and the look on his face was something Clara had not expected to feel anything about. She felt something small and specific. Not vindication, something quieter. The recognition of a man who was finally at 35 beginning to see past the surface of things. It had come late, but it had come. Carter was already seated. He looked at Clara when she came in, and she gave him the small nod that meant good, we're proceeding. He nodded back. They sat. Pritchard looked at the assembled group, Edward, Sophia, Clara, Carter, and said with the professional composure of a man who had seen stranger gatherings, Shall we begin? Yes, Clara said. The meeting lasted 3 hours. It was not simple. Clara had not expected it to be simple. Simple was not what good arrangements were in her experience. Good arrangements were the result of two parties who both understood what they needed and were willing to be honest about it, and honest conversations about real needs took time. Sophia produced the river access maps 40 minutes in when the conversation reached the question of what the Beaumont estate could offer in exchange for the Carter distribution network. Edward had been talking about the land value and the crop potential in general terms that Clara was finding insufficient when Sophia placed the maps on the table and said, the specific asset is the river access. Here and here. If you're moving goods to Lexington, this route saves 3 days over the road. Carter leaned forward. He looked at the maps for 30 seconds. Then he looked at Clara. She looked at the maps. 3 days. 3 days on the Lexington route was not a small number. 3 days was the difference between two market windows, between two price tiers, between a contract that worked and a contract that strained. You've mapped this, Carter said to Sophia. Last winter, Sophia said, I hired a surveyor. Edward didn't know I was doing it. Edward looked at his wife. She did not look at him. She was looking at Carter. I wasn't sure it was relevant, she said. I was just documenting what was there. It's relevant, Carter said. It's the most relevant thing we've discussed today. Clara looked at her husband. He looked at her. The same look as always, both of them present, both of them thinking, arriving at the same understanding, without either of them having to perform the process of arriving at it. We'll do it, Clara said. Edward said, What are the terms? Revenue share over 7 years, Clara said. 55-45 in our favor for the first 3, then even at 50-50 for the final 4. In exchange, full access to the river route and the Carter distribution network. She paused. And Sophia has a formal role in the arrangement. Edward looked at her. What kind of role? Management liaison, Clara said. She coordinates between the Beaumont Estates operations and the Carter network. Given that she understands the river route and the soil situation and the budget better than anyone else in this room, including you. She paused. It's the practical decision. Edward was quiet. Sophia looked at her husband. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at Clara. You are doing this, he said, for the right reasons. The right reasons are always practical, Clara said. Sophia understands the estate. The estate is what we're investing in. It's straightforward. He shook his head slowly. That's not what I mean. She looked at him. You are not doing this because of what happened, he said. You are doing this in spite of it. And you are giving my wife a role she deserves because you recognize what she is, even after, he stopped. Yes, Clara said, simply. He pressed his hands flat on the table. I did not leave you because Sophia was better than you, he said. It was the thing he had been moving toward since the church 8 years ago, slowly through the distance of years and difficulty, and the specific education of consequence. I left because I was told my whole life that beauty was worth more than character, that a pretty face at a dinner table was worth more than a mind in a library. He looked at her directly. I chose the world's criteria instead of my own, and my own, if I had used them, would have chosen differently. The office was very still. Carter did not move. Pritchard studied the documents in front of him. Clara looked at Edward Beaumont and felt the last piece of something complete itself, not with drama, not with the feeling she had expected when she had imagined this moment across 8 years. With something much quieter. The closing of a door that had been opened just enough to let in a draft for all these years, and that could now be properly closed. You did not break my life, she said. You gave me the reason to build one. He looked at her. I know, he said, and I am sorry, not for giving you the reason, for the cost of the reason. She nodded. She picked up her pen. Pritchard, she said, draw up the final terms. And in the lawyer's office in Richmond, Virginia, in the autumn of 1824, people sat around a table and built something that had not existed the morning before, not from sentiment, not from forgiveness, that was offered before it was earned, but from the practical, clear-eyed recognition that what each of them brought to the table was real, and that real things combined honestly produced results that none of them could achieve alone. Clara Carter signed the document. She signed her own name, her full name, the name she had chosen and built and brought back to Virginia in the clean, precise handwriting that her governess had insisted on and that had served her in every letter, every contract, every 31 entries, and every agricultural report, and every decision she had made since a summer morning in 1812, when she had walked out of a church into the heat and decided that the only thing left to do was begin. She had begun. She had not stopped, and the document on the table in front of her was the proof of it. Not the most important proof, not the thing she was proudest of, but the proof that was visible in this room to these people on this specific afternoon, when everything that had started in a church had arrived at its actual conclusion. Not revenge, not rescue. Just the long, clear, uninterrupted line between a woman who had decided to build something and the thing she had built. The partnership agreement was signed on a Thursday. Clara noticed this only afterward, that the day of the week was Thursday, the same day Carter had come to the farm boundary in Kentucky, 3 years into her building, the same day they had kept for years as the day of their meetings, the day that had become the rhythm of everything they had built together. She mentioned it to him in the carriage on the way back to the Morrison house where they were staying. He looked at her. Is that significant? He said. No, she said. It's just true. He smiled. Not the wide social smile that men performed for rooms, the small specific smile she had come to recognize as his actual one, the one that arrived when something pleased him, and he did not bother to contain it. Then it's a good day, he said. She looked out the carriage window at Virginia moving past. She had expected to feel more coming back. She had expected Virginia to require something of her, some emotional reckoning, some weight of return that would need to be processed and filed and moved past. She had prepared for it in the careful way she prepared for things, which meant she had thought about it honestly and decided what she was going to do with whatever she felt. What she actually felt was quieter than she had expected. Not emptiness. Something more like completion. The specific quality of a thing that has been carrying open edges for a long time and has finally been closed. Not because the past had been resolved into something comfortable, but because it had been resolved into something true, and truth was the only foundation she had ever trusted. The Beaumont estate arrangement was going to require 6 months of active structure before it ran itself. Clara had already made a list, the labor coordination for the river route, the first Lexington delivery using the combined network, the soil rotation correction on the eastern section that Sophia had identified, and Clara had confirmed with 30 seconds of looking at the field maps. She was going to send Thomas. Thomas, who had been with her for 6 years, and who she trusted completely, and who had told her the previous spring that he had a son who was learning the land, and that if she ever had a Kentucky operation that needed managing at a distance, the son was the man to consider. She had filed that conversation under future uses, and now the future had arrived. She wrote to Thomas that evening. She also wrote to Aunt Margaret, who was 80 now, and had handed the farm management to Clara and Carter 2 years ago, with the same brisk efficiency she applied to everything, and who received letters from Virginia with the particular interest of a woman who had watched Clara leave with 2 bags and a case of correspondence, and had always understood what that leaving would eventually become. The letter to Margaret was short. "We've made the arrangement. The river route is 3 days better than the road. Thomas's son will manage the Kentucky coordination. I spoke with Sophia. She's more than I expected, and less than she should have been permitted to become. But she's learning, and that's what matters. I'll tell you the rest when we're home. C." She sealed it. She started on the coordination schedule. Carter came in an hour later, looked at the papers spread across the writing table, and said, "You've been home 3 hours." "I've been thinking about the schedule for 3 days," she said. "I'm just writing it down." He sat in the chair beside her, not across from her, beside her the way he always sat when they were working, because beside her was the position from which he could see what she was seeing. "Show me," he said. She showed him. He read through it. He asked 2 questions, both of them. The questions she had expected him to ask, the ones she had already identified as the points that required more thought. She told him what she had been thinking about each. He listened. "The Thomas's son question," he said. "Are you certain?" "No," she said. "I'm confident." "There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Certainty is what you have before you've worked with someone," she said. "Confidence is what you have after you've watched Thomas for 6 years and listened to him talk about his son for 2. She paused. "I'll never be certain until we've worked with him, so I'll proceed with confidence and verify as we go." Carter looked at her. "That," he said, "is exactly right." She went back to the schedule. It was the following morning when Edward came. Not to the Morrison house, he came to Pritchard's office, where Clara and Carter had arranged to finalize 2 remaining document details before leaving Virginia. He arrived at 9 o'clock, 20 minutes before Clara expected to see anyone, and he was not carrying the specific weight of business. He was carrying something else. Pritchard showed him in and excused himself with the practiced tact of a man who understood when a room needed fewer people. Edward stood across from them. He had the look of someone who had not slept well, not from distress. Exactly, more from the quality of a person who had spent the night thinking about something they had been not thinking about for years, and had finally let themselves think about it completely. "I wanted to say something," he said, "before you leave." "All right," Clara said. He looked at her directly. "I have been thinking about what you said yesterday, that I gave you the reason to build." He paused. "I've been using that in my head as a way to make what happened less than it was, that it turned out well for you, so it was not as bad as it was." He stopped. "That's not honest. It turned out well for you because of what you chose to do with it, not because of what I did." Clara looked at him. "The reason was real," she said. "What you did was real, and what I built was also real. Those things can all be true at the same time." "I know," he said. I'm not asking you to diminish what happened. He paused. I'm saying I understand now that what I said in that church was the most careless thing I have ever done. Not the cruelest. The most careless. And careless damage is still damage. The office was quiet. Carter said nothing. He was present fully solidly in the way he was always present, but he understood that this was between Clara and Edward, and he was not going to fill the silence she needed to think in. Yes, she said. It is. I am sorry, Edward said. Not as an explanation, not with qualifications. Just, I am sorry. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the church, about the necklace on the offering table, about the carriage going west, and the field notes in her lap, and Aunt Margaret waiting at the door, and Thomas at the edge of the north quarter saying, Miss Clara, I have been farming Kentucky land for 40 years. She thought about a man on horseback at the property boundary saying, What are you planting? She thought about, I'm asking because I'm interested in what you think. She thought about everything that had been built on the other side of that church door, everything that had come from the specific terrible gift of being redirected so completely that the only thing left to do was find out what she was capable of when she stopped building someone else's future and started building her own. I know you are, she said. He nodded. Take care of the river route, she said. And listen to Sophia about the eastern section. She's right about the soil rotation. He blinked. The shift from the personal to the practical caught him for a moment, and then he understood it. This was how she closed things. Not with declarations, not with the extended ceremonies of forgiveness, with the forward motion toward what needed doing next. I will, he said. Good, she said. He left. Carter looked at her. You all right? He said. Yes, she said. And meant it in the specific, complete way that yes sometimes meant not fine, not managing, but actually genuinely simply yes. Ready to go home? He said. Yes, she said again. They left Virginia the following morning. The carriage ride back to Kentucky took 4 days. Clara spent them partly on the coordination schedule, partly on the agricultural correspondence she had let accumulate during the Virginia trip, and partly for the first time in a long time not working at all. Just sitting with the window and the road and the country moving past, and her husband beside her reading his own papers, occasionally asking her what she thought about something, occasionally telling her what he thought about something else. On the second day, somewhere in the western Virginia hills, he put down his papers and looked at her. What are you thinking about? He said. Sophia, she said. He waited. She has a good mind, Clara said. She was given no reason to develop it, and she developed it anyway because the situation required it. She paused. That's harder than having a reason. Harder than having someone like Margaret who expected it of you, or a father who taught you to read accounts, or a library you were given access to. She looked at the window. She did it without any of that. Yes, Carter said. The river route was her idea, Clara said. She hired the surveyor herself, kept the maps herself, for a year before anyone asked her about them. She paused. She's more like me than I expected. Carter looked at her for a moment. Does that change anything? He said. Clara thought about it honestly. It changes how I think about her, she said. Not what happened, but who she is now is not who she was at 20. She paused. I was not who I am now at 20 either. No, Carter said. You weren't. None of us were, she said. That's the point, I suppose. He reached over and took her hand. She held it. The hills moved past outside. On the 4th day they crossed into Kentucky, and something in Clara's chest shifted the way it shifted every time she crossed back the specific bodily recognition of ground that was hers. Not her parents' ground, not her family's name. Her ground built and earned and known inch by inch. Thomas met them at the property. He was 67 now, and he moved with the careful deliberateness of a man who was managing the years with the same attention he applied to the land. And he had the expression he always had when she returned from anywhere. The expression of someone who is glad a thing they value has come back. Miss Clara, he said. He still called her that. She had stopped correcting him years ago. It was his name for her, and it was in its way more accurate than anything else anyone had ever called her. Thomas, she said. How's the winter wheat? Coming in well, he said. The North Quarter drainage held through the rains last week. No flooding. Good, she said. I need to talk to you about your son. Thomas looked at her. Is he ready for Kentucky coordination on the Beaumont arrangement? She said. Thomas was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then he said, He's been ready for 2 years. I just didn't know when you'd need him. I need him now, she said. Thomas smiled. The full smile, the one that reached everything. I'll write to him tonight. Tell him Thursday, she said. First meeting is Thursday. Yes, ma'am, he said. She walked into the farmhouse, into the kitchen that smelled like every morning she had started here coffee, and the outdoors coming through the window, and the particular smell of a working house that was used rather than displayed. She sat at the kitchen table. She put her hands flat on its surface. She thought about a 24-year-old woman sitting at a writing table by candlelight on a June morning in Virginia, writing a list of true things she was trying to stand on. What I know. She knew considerably more now. What comes next? She had more to build. That had not changed. She pulled the coordination schedule from her bag. She spread it on the table. She picked up her pen. Carter came in, made coffee without being asked because he had been making coffee in this kitchen for 4 years, and knew where everything was, and set a cup beside her elbow and sat across from her. Where do we start? He said. The river route timing, she said. If we're going to make the spring Lexington window, we need the first delivery coordinated before February. February, he said. Thomas's son starts Thursday. So we have from Thursday to January 15th to have the route mapped and the first shipment staged. She looked at the schedule. It's tight. It's possible, he said. It's possible, she agreed. She wrote the first entry on the new schedule. 3 years after the partnership was signed, the Carter-Beaumont River route had become the most efficient distribution line in the county. Thomas's son James, 28, with his father's patient attention to the land and his own instinct for logistics, had turned the river coordination into something that ran with the same quiet efficiency that Clara had brought to the East Field drainage, without drama, without announcement, simply producing results that compounded over time. The Beaumont estate's debt was cleared in 4 years instead of 7. Sophia had sent a letter when the final payment was made. It arrived on a Thursday. The letter said, "We couldn't have done it without the partnership. But I want you to know that what changed the estate was not the arrangement. It was Edward learning to listen. And he learned to listen because you showed him what listening was worth. Sophia." Clara read the letter at the kitchen table. She filed it under S. Then she went to the East Field, which was in its 8th productive year, and still the baseline against which she measured everything she had done since, and she walked it the way she walked it every spring, slowly, with full attention, checking what the land was telling her. It told her the same thing it always told her when she paid attention: that what was tended grew, that what was neglected did not, regardless of its potential, that the difference between a failed field and a productive one was almost never talent or luck. It was the sustained, unglamorous daily decision to keep looking. She walked back to the house. Carter was at the table with the accounts. He looked up when she came in. "How's the East Field?" "Good," she said. "Same as last year, but better." "That's always the goal," he said. She sat across from him. "Edward is coming to the spring coordination meeting," she said. "Sophia is also coming." "I know," he said. "James mentioned it." "She's going to propose expanding the river route to a second Lexington merchant," Clara said. Carter looked at her. "She told you." "She wrote last week," Clara said. "She wanted my opinion before she raised it in the meeting." He set down his pen. "She asked your opinion," he said. "Yes." "About expanding her own operations route?" "Yes," Clara said. She wanted to know if I thought it would strain the coordination or strengthen it. Carter was quiet for a moment. And what did you tell her? I told her to bring the specifics to the meeting and we'd look at them together, Clara said. I told her a second merchant could work if the timing was right and the volume was right. She paused. And I told her that asking the question before the meeting instead of in it was the right instinct and she should keep doing it. Carter looked at his wife. You're teaching her, he said. I'm answering questions, Clara said. Clara. She looked at him. You're teaching her, he said again. The way Margaret taught you. The way Thomas taught you. By answering the right questions when they're asked. She sat with this. She thought about Margaret at the door of the farmhouse. Come in. There's food. We'll talk about the East Field in the morning. She thought about Thomas saying, You're going to be considerably more than all right, Miss Clara. She thought about Carter on horseback at the property boundary, saying, What are you planting? She thought about the specific chain of people who had asked her good questions and answered hers, and created between them the conditions in which what she was had been allowed to become what she was now. Yes, she said. I suppose I am. It was in the summer of 1824, 12 years after the church, 8 years after Kentucky, 4 years after Virginia, that Edward came to the farm alone, not for a meeting, not for coordination. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon without announcement, and Robert Thomas's son had taken on additional responsibilities, and one of them was managing the farm's visitors, came to find Clara in the North Quarter, and said that Mr. Beaumont was at the house and asked if she was available. She was not alarmed. She had long since stopped being alarmed by Edward. She came back to the house and found him in the front room standing, rather than sitting with the hat in his hands that she recognized as the posture of someone who had something to say and was arranging how to say it. Edward, she said. Clara, he said. I'm sorry to come without writing first. It's all right, she said. Is something wrong? No, he said. Nothing is wrong. He paused. I came because I wanted to say something in person, not in a letter. She sat down. He stayed standing for a moment, and then sat, which was more like him, the old him, the version she remembered from the parlor in Virginia, the man who had always been slightly more comfortable when he was performing ease. He was not performing ease now. I ran into James Hargrove last week, he said. He told me about the school. Clara looked at him. The school, she said. He said you've been teaching, Edward said. Young women. Agricultural management, accounting, land assessment. He paused. He said you've had 14 students in the past 3 years. 15, she said. As of last month. 15 women, he said. Learning what you built. Learning to build their own, she said. That's different. He looked at her. How did it start? He said. She thought about it. A girl came to the farm, she said. 3 years ago, 17. Her family had land that was failing and she had ideas about what to do with it, and no one who would take the ideas seriously. She paused. She reminded me of someone. He looked at his hands. I told her to come back the following week, Clara said. I told her to bring what she'd been thinking, and I would look at it. She paused. Her plan was good. We worked on it for 6 weeks. Her family's land turned around in 2 seasons. She paused again. She told 2 people. They told others. 15 women, he said. So far, she said. He was quiet. Do you ever regret it? He said. Any of it, what you came through, what it cost you to get here? She looked at him steadily. No, she said. He looked surprised. The way people always look surprised when she said this, they expected the question to produce more to open into something complicated. She continued. I regretted things in the first year. The waste of 3 years of belief. The cost of the church. She paused. I stopped regretting them when I understood they were the exact price of what I became. Not a good trade, just the actual price. She held his gaze. I don't regret believing in you. I regret believing that being seen by someone was the same as being chosen. That's the thing I actually had to unlearn. She paused. and I had to go to Kentucky to unlearn it, apparently. He was quiet for a long moment. The girl, he said. The 17-year-old with the land plan. Yes. What's her name? Anna, Clara said. What's she doing now? Clara looked at him. She's teaching the other 14, she said. Edward Beaumont sat in the front room of the Carter farmhouse on a Tuesday afternoon in the summer of 1824 and looked at the woman he had said those words to in a church 12 years ago, and what was on his face was something Clara had not expected and found she did not need to name. It was enough to see it. It was enough that it was real. Thank you, he said, for the partnership, for what you've done for the estate. He paused. For what you said to Sophia. He stopped. For all of it. We built something useful, she said. That's what matters. He nodded. He stood. He put his hat back on. At the door he stopped. Do you ever regret? He said, and then he stopped himself. She waited. No, he said. Never mind, you already answered. She looked at him. I regret believing I needed someone else to choose me, she said. That's the whole of it. He looked at her for a moment. Then he walked out into the Kentucky afternoon, and the door closed behind him, and Clara stood in the front room of the house she had helped build on the land she had helped grow, and she did not watch him go. She was already thinking about Anna, about the spring coordination meeting, about the 16th student who had written last week asking if she could come and learn, about the East Field in its 8th year, about Thursday. Carter found her there 10 minutes later. He looked at her face. How was it? He said. Finished, she said. Completely finished. He nodded. Good, he said. James left the spring schedule on the table. The second merchant proposal from Sophia is interesting. I think it works. I think so too, she said. Let's look at it. They went to the table. They sat beside each other. They started working. Outside Kentucky was itself wide and productive and indifferent to the past of anyone working. It concerned only with what was being done with it today. The same ground that had received Clara Whitmore 12 years ago, with nothing but 2 bags and a case of correspondence and a list of true things she was trying to stand on. She had stood on them. She had built on them. And the woman who had been told in a church full of witnesses that she was not the one who was wanted had become in the only way that ever truly mattered the way built by work and honesty, and the sustained daily courage to keep going completely, permanently, untouchably herself. No one could take that. No one ever had. No one ever would.